everybody. I'm Tricia Martin. I own, along with my husband partner Winston Ely, a Brooklyn-based design firm, just about a half a mile down the street in the BAM Cultural District. I've been working with the Brooklyn Greenway Initiative since 2008 on trying to think about how we might be able to integrate green infrastructure into the 14 miles of the proposed Brooklyn Greenway. So today I'm going to share with you some work that we've done along with the Brooklyn Greenway Initiative and our engineers, WeDesign Dynamics. I don't think any of them can make it this evening. We were able to do this project through a grant funded by the New York State Department of State Local Waterfront Revitalization Program, and Fred Landa is here from that program, and so we're really excited about this project. And so I'm going to share a little bit about it with you. I just wanted to say that so far I'm hearing quite a few themes appearing through all the presentations, and you're going to hear that recurring in my presentation as well. This idea of something being stacked. We've heard about stacked resources. We've heard about stacking different partners, and we're also hearing a lot about connectivity, and I would say a lot of this project is about networking connectivity and about stacking resources. I can't help it. I've been doing a lot of research about greenways and working on a publication about greenways, so I'm going to take a minute just to talk a little bit about where we've come in the development of greenway design. And Robert Searns wrote a seminal article where he talked about greenways in terms of generation 1, 2, and 3, where the generation 1 greenways were sort of the parkway system, and really thinking about our roadways as being attractive linear parks, as we know, sort of if you've been on the Merritt Parkway. And then, of course, we all remember the kind of rails to trails movement that really drove the sort of generation 2 type of greenway, and Adrian talked quite a bit about some of those rails to trails projects. As we started to get to the generation 3 greenways, sort of in the last 10 to 15 years, you're looking at more complex types of open space systems, where now we're trying to, we're moving our greenways not only from the countryside, but into the urban fabric, and trying to create recreational amenities, and in some cases also ecological benefits in the city. I would argue that perhaps we're moving into a generation 4 type of greenway where we're really stacking those resources. We are really demanding a lot of our greenways. They're no longer places just for recreation or passive, active and passive, or as transportation infrastructure, but really now becoming important backbones to a larger network of green infrastructure. And of course now, post-Sandy, here in New York, this is something that's new, but in other parts of the world, how do the greenways act as a means of flood protection? And I would argue that these projects on the bottom here, I don't have time to go into all of them, are really perhaps in this generation 4, and we could add Brooklyn Bridge Park to this as well, of looking at greenway systems that really are stacking resources. So the planning of the Brooklyn Greenway started back in 2004 by the Brooklyn Greenway Initiative, and they put out their design principles for the Brooklyn Greenway. And then, excitingly enough, in 2012, DOT actually put out a comprehensive master plan for actually how they would go about building the 14 miles of the Greenway, which actually will go into Capitol and is already started now, which is very exciting, and we're very encouraged by this. The document is robust, and it talks a lot about where the Greenway will go on the street. It's all within the public right-of-way. However, it falls short of really showing how this Greenway could also be an important piece of green infrastructure system for our cities. And so our work really sort of has at its premise that as we roll out the Greenway, we also want to roll out the opportunity to maximize green infrastructure. And Adrian, I'm going to bring up your flower. It was just a lovely little diagram of why we do green infrastructure, and that's really why we did this project. It's because we feel that while we're encouraged by DEP's encouragement of building bioswales throughout the city and supporting the kind of projects we've heard about all today, we really feel like we need to do more. And that what's exciting about a greenway, and especially as it's built in segments, is that those segments are part of a watershed, and they're at the lowest contour of the watershed for the most part, at least the Brooklyn Greenway is. So what a neat opportunity to think of it as a backbone of a larger neighborhood system. So I'm going to sort of I'm going to go very quickly through this project so I can answer more questions later. There's a lot of details in here, but basically our methodology was to really analyze all 15 segments of the Greenway, and we looked at all sorts of important things when you're thinking about green infrastructure: topography, soil, where the floodplain was, where are the loading docks. Those of you who have done any design with swales know it's very hard in an industrial district to find places to put them. And then after that analysis of each of these different segments, we started to understand the kind of beast we were dealing with. And what we sort of decided to do with this project is really create a framework that consisted of a kit of parts. And we'll get more into that kit of parts in a minute. And then we sort of said, well, we think we need to apply this framework. We need to figure out how this actually plays out. And we picked 2 case studies, Red Hook and Sunset Park, and I'll talk more about one of those in a minute. Over here, another important part of this framework is understanding this greenway as part of a watershed in a community. And so for each of the segments of the greenway, we sort of established what its watershed was, and we started to quantify, talking about ecological systems and metrics, we started to quantify how much water are we really dealing with in each segment. And so we had Tier 1, which was just looking at how much water came off the greenway proper. Tier 2 included the sort of streets that went 1 block uphill, as well as any vacant or parking lots. Tier 3 included any roofs, thinking that potentially one day we're taking the water off of the roofs through our backbone system. And Tier 4 is really the sort of the big daddy, where you sort of say how much water is actually coming off this whole watershed along this segment. And what that was very important to us, because we need to understand then how much green infrastructure are we going to need to actually meet a certain goal in capturing the water. So then we had to develop our kit of parts. And what we did is we understood that the greenway had various conditions. Sometimes it went along a public park. That was kind of cool. Sometimes it actually went along the waterfront. That offered certain types of opportunities we could start to imagine. Sometimes it went underneath an elevated structure. So we sort of documented and came up with a sort of 8 different conditions that we found. And then, of course, we sort of we had our little trusty toolkit of all different sorts of stormwater management, green infrastructure technologies. Many of these you're all very familiar with. And of course, we had to add in some of the sort of resiliency barrier types of typologies, wetland breaks, because we're also looking at ways in which potentially, given the right condition, the greenway can also help deal with sort of climate change adaptation, storm surge protection aspects. A key piece to our kit of parts is this part of our project we call the big moves. And they're not big because they're like rocket science and no one can figure them out. They're big moves because they're actually very hard to build and do in the city of New York. Lots of regulatory reasons. We're a dense city, lots of physical constraints. But we thought that these are important. If you're going to have an interconnected system, we need to figure out how to get through these obstacles. I'm not going to get into a lot of detail, but currently it's very difficult to get water across the street. You can have bioswales on a block, but you can't have the overflow of the bottom, the last swale go across the street down to the next block. Conveying water to the nearest receiving body. The greenway runs often 1 block uphill from the water. So a lot of our work looked at how we could get actually that water from the greenway down the street or in some form as quickly as possible to the nearest receiving body. A lot of our work really looked at, it isn't so much about collecting a certain percentage of water in a bioswale and that is it. It was more about how do we keep the system continuous and get that water filtered and clean to then, in this case, mostly the East River or the Erie Basin. This one is also, this is a big no-no right now, getting water from private property to public land and then water from public land to private land. There's very good reasons why this is not allowed. I'm not going to get into that, but I do believe that with enough really smart people, we can kind of come together to figure out how to get past this obstacle, because we would be able to build a lot more green infrastructure if we could. I'm going to move a little bit more quickly. And then, of course, also thinking about, given that we have lots of elevated structures and highways, how can we take all that water and deal with it somehow through green infrastructure on the ground? And I know that Susanna's not here yet, but she's done a great project where they've looked at that as well. So at the end of the day, this framework then, if you sort of take your condition, you put together the sort of typologies or techniques that make the most sense within that condition, you get a set of outcomes. And so we started to look at what are all the sort of environmental, ecological outcomes we get from pairing these different, this sort of framework. This sort of became then our sort of scaffold for how we started to look at different sites along the Greenway. And then in addition, because we have a number of sites that do go along the waterfront, we did start to think about what if this Greenway was raised? What if this Greenway actually acted as the storm surge barrier? Could it also be the mechanism for the stormwater, but also be that which helps keep our neighborhoods protected? And then we looked at, these are wide strategies, but we also looked at narrow strategies, given that many times space is a constraint. And so then I'm going to go very quickly. We looked at Red Hook, which is just right next door to here, more closely, since it did get quite a bit of flood inundation, a lot of flood inundation. And so what we did was we looked at soil, and you have some high water tables here, also creating some sort of a challenge for us. And we identified specific conditions. That's going to drive me crazy. It's gone. And sort of, again, here's our framework. This is what we've got. These are the typologies. These are the positive outcomes that you get. We mapped loading docks. We mapped large street trees. As many of you know who do green infrastructure, it's hard to do that around sort of legacy trees. There's a couple other things mapped on here. And then we created that master plan. And I'd be interested in having a discussion about the pros and cons of master planning, because I'm not so sure it's something that you don't definitely want to do. But anyway, so we took our framework and said, okay, well, we know we have certain conditions. We know the kinds of typologies that work well at that condition. We know these big moves are important. We want to keep the water going. We want to get it to the receiving body. So our first alternative actually uses the master plan path and sort of is really more maximizes green infrastructure over resiliency. And our alternative two, we couldn't help it. We had to take it out to the edge and see what was going to do there. And actually, you know, along the theme of discussing things with private developers and owners, we've actually engaged in quite a few conversations with private owners. They're concerned about flooding of their sites as well. And then we quantified all this and figured out how much water we would be sort of collecting through all these different mechanisms. And these are just we're not trying to redesign Valentino Park here, but anyway, we're just using it as a way to get some of that water off the street through a park and out to the Erie Basin here, mostly looking at swales and street ends. And then our sections here were, you know, your typical, you know, bioswale, looking at connecting them into parks. And then here along Beard Street, we actually did do a study of looking at how we could raise it. And we mostly did this to also show some of the constraints. Obviously, we'd have to integrate some of the sidewalks, so you'd have a raised sidewalk. It takes about 150 or so feet to get the ramp to code to get to the top. So this is not something you could do on a block-by-block basis. You'd be doing this all over the place, which wouldn't really make much sense. But it also is an intriguing idea for thinking about in places where you can do this, having that experience of being elevated. And then, of course, this is along Red Hook Park. This is actually a mapped street called Halleck Street that is now just an abandoned road. And the idea would be to turn this into the Greenway to run through here and actually be able to be an elevated structure that then extends into the park here. This does, oh, sorry, you can't read this here. This then brings us to, you know, we didn't pick Gowanus as a case study, but we did do a lot of analysis of the Gowanus stretch of the Greenway that really runs up Smith Street and then Hamilton Avenue here. And we do have some, you know, high water table, as I'm sure you guys know already. And we started to look at, you know, some existing conditions. We did quantify the water in all of the tiers for the watershed to understand the kind of water that we were dealing with here. And we did begin to identify opportunities. This is not legible, but most of what we came up with was that even though there's lots of loading docks along Smith Street, on one side there is some room for some swales on the other. Thinking about the use of street ends, you know, a lot of the work, I would say, for Gowanus has been done in many ways in this type of thinking. You've got Sponge Park, you've got the kind of work that Lee is doing. So, I think there's already a lot of really good thinking along those lines. Let's see. And then on the other side, just maybe potentially working around the elevated structure to think about how to capture more water. And that is that. Very quick run through. Right.